my name is Sarah and it's time for my November wrap-up. It is officially December, which first of all, how is it December already? Like, the year is almost over and it's kind of crazy because it feels like it went super fast. With this final month of the year upon us, it is time to talk about what I read and wrote in the month of November. If you watched the video at the end of October, then you know that I participated in NaNoWriMo this month. NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, where people all over the world attempt to write a 50,000 word novel in the month of November. This was my 4th year participating and it did not quite go as planned. I wound up writing somewhere around 18,000-ish words in my novel. I totally changed my plot from what I talked about in my video and didn't really even decide on a time period until I was like 3,000 words into the story. But beyond that, I just had a lot of different realizations about my own personal writing and things like that. But the major thing that I realized over the month of November, which is part of why I made the intentional decision to stop writing and to not try to push for a story that I wasn't really connecting to and didn't really feel like was going to be that good anyway, is because for a whole slew of different reasons, which if you want to know more about, we can talk about in the comments, this is just not the time in my life where I have the bandwidth to be dedicating to writing a novel. So I'm still pursuing other writing projects and I will still be flexing my fiction muscles by writing short stories and things like that. But I feel like the novel writing portion of my life is not yet upon me, and November was already going to be a slightly crazy month because it's the start of the holiday season and all sorts of other stuff, and so I just made the intentional decision to stop writing instead of forcing a story that in reality about 80 to 90% of it probably would have gotten scrapped anyway. So that is the writing update for the month of November. If you did NaNoWriMo, I would love to hear how you did, so please let me know in the comments. And now on to the books. So November turned out to be a pretty fantastic month for reading. I read a grand total of 13 books, including 8 new reads and 5 rereads, for a combined total of 4,919 pages and an average star rating of 4.38. Because we've got 13 books, there's a lot to get through, so we're gonna jump right into it. Up first, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This is a futuristic sci-fi video game reality-ish story about a kid who is trying to find an Easter egg in a virtual reality game in order to win the $2.4 billion fortune of the game's creator. I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really loved it. Super fun, super inventive, and I actually already did a full review on this, which I will link below if you want to hear my more extensive thoughts. Up next, Catching Fire and Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. So obviously The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2 came out on November 20th. I was super excited if you hadn't been able to tell because I really love this series and I finished up my reread of the series prior to going to see the film. This was my 3rd read of the series, and on this particular reread, my opinion of both of these books vastly improved and I wound up giving both of them 4.5 out of 5 stars. I did a full series review of the Hunger Games trilogy, which I will link below if you want to hear more extensive thoughts. Up next, Scarlet, Ferris, Cress, and Winter, all by Marissa Meyer. So these 4 books are the rest of the Lunar Chronicle series, which is a post-World War IV sci-fi retelling of popular fairy tales. I read the first book, Cinder, in October, which is a retelling of Cinderella. Scarlet is a retelling of Red Riding Hood. Cress is a retelling of Rapunzel. Winter is a retelling of Snow White. And Ferris is a prequel novella-ish type story that gives the backstory of our villain that runs through the whole series, Queen Lavanna, the evil queen from Snow White. So basically what happened is Winter came out on November 10th. I had only read Cinder up to that point. Everyone was excited, everyone was gushing, everyone was freaking out about it, and I wanted to be part of the gushing and the freaking out and the excitedness that was taking place all over the internet. So on November 9th, I said screw it, and I ordered the entire rest of the series. They arrived on my doorstep a couple of days later on Thursday evening, and so on Thursday night, I picked up Scarlet, and by Monday night, I had binge read the entire series. Basically, if you cannot tell, I absolutely adore everything about this series. I gave Scarlet 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I have already done a full video review on it, which I will link below if you want to check that out. Cress and Winter each got 5 stars. I loved them to pieces and could gush about them all day long, and I will have reviews on both of those coming next week. Ferris got 3.5 stars from me, not necessarily because it wasn't well written or anything, it's the villain's story, and so I didn't have that same love and emotional connection to it that I did for the rest of the series. This series is just fantastic, and if you love fairy tales and sci-fi and fantasy, you need to pick this series up pronto. And now I'm gonna stop talking about it because my hand really hurts. Oh my gosh! Up next Anne of Avonlea and Anne of the Island, both by L.M. Montgomery. So after I finished winter, my stress levels were a little bit high and I needed some books to just lower those stress levels, books that I had read, books that I knew what was going to happen, and books where I wasn't going to have my heart in my throat the entire story wondering what was going to happen to my favorite characters and if they were going to survive. I actually ran Anne of Avonlea at the beginning of the month in between my read of Catching Fire and Mockingjay, and so once I finished reading Winter, I read Anne of the Island. These are the second and third books in the Anne of Green Gables series by L.M. Montgomery. In the second installment, Anne forgoes a scholarship to Redmond College to stay home with Marilla. They adopt a couple of twins. She becomes the teacher of the Avonlea school, and all sorts of adventures and craziness ensue, as is prone to happen around Anne. One of the reasons I love Anne of Avonlea is because we see all the imagination and adventure and just spunk and sass and hilariousness that is Anne Shirley, but in a slightly more mature fashion than we see in the first Anne of Green Gables book. In Anne of the Island, Anne and Gilbert and the rest of the crew go off to Redmond College for 4 years away at school. Anne of the Island is without a doubt one of my absolute favorite books in this series because we really get to see a lot more interaction between Anne and Gilbert in this book for the first time, and I just love them and I love their relationship. I love Anne Shirley and I love Anne and Gilbert and all of the characters and Avonlea and all of this world. I gave both of these books 5 out of 5 stars, and when I finish my reread of the series, I will be doing a separate video review of the full series to give my more extensive thoughts and gushing on this series because it's just wonderful. Up next, The Never War by DJ McHale. This is the third book in the Pendragon series, which is a YA fantasy series about a kid named Bobby who is a traveler, which means he can travel between different times and territories and the like. In this third installment of the series, Bobby is back along with his new friend Spader, the traveler from Chloral, who we met in the second book of the series, The Lost City of Far. They have followed St. Dane to First Earth, where they are once again attempting to figure out his next step in his plan to topple the entire universe. Bobby is the traveler from Second Earth, which is Earth in the present time, and First Earth is Earth in 1937, so a few years before the start of World War II. Bobby and Spader arrive and meet Gunny, the traveler from First Earth, and together the three of them keep their eyes and ears open and attempt to find St. Dane and figure out what they need to do to prevent First Earth from toppling into chaos. In their attempt to locate St. Dane and figure out his next steps, they stumble upon the terrible realization that St. Dane's plan not only involves throwing First Earth into chaos, but Second and Third Earth as well. So I wound up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars, and so far this series is just kind of meh for me. Like, the first book was fine, the second book was fine. I like books 2 and 3, I think, better than the first book, but there's just nothing about this series that I am totally falling in love with yet. The story this time around was definitely the most intriguing of the 3 that I have read so far, but other than that, like I said, the series is really just kind of meh for me. As I'm getting further along into the series, it's starting to feel very formulaic, where they show up at a place, they have to figure out who St. Dane is, where he is, what his plan is, and then they have to figure out how to stop that plan. They save the planet, hooray, move on to the next thing. And this third time around, like I said, it's just starting to feel very formulaic. Maybe because it's starting to feel very formulaic, the writing is starting to feel a bit clunkier than it did in the first book, and I don't know, I'm not totally impressed yet, and I'm not yet convinced that this is worth the time that it would take to read all 10 books. I will continue on to the 4th book at some point within the next couple of months and make my official determination from there, but it's not looking very good. Up next, A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine L'Engle. If you're not familiar with the Time Quintet, it is a magical realism series that follows the Murray family, primarily the oldest and youngest children, Meg and Charles Wallace, and the various adventures that they have. In this third installment, Charles Wallace is 15 years old, Meg is married and pregnant and home for Thanksgiving, and during Thanksgiving dinner, their father gets a phone call from the president informing them that a man named Mad Dog Brenzillo is threatening nuclear war. Mrs. O'Keefe, Meg's mother-in-law, then charges Charles Wallace with averting this problem. Charles Wallace goes out to the stargazing rock to ponder this charge from Mrs. O'Keefe, calls out a rune that she said earlier in the evening, and a unicorn appears, and off they set on an adventure through time and space to change the might have been that will prevent this war from happening. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I don't love it quite as much as A Wrinkle in Time and A Wind in the Door, but it's still a really fascinating story. I love Madeleine L'Engle's writing style. I love the change and the maturity that we see in the characters of Charles Wallace and Meg from the first 2 books. Charles Wallace in particular is just very young. It's fun to see how his character is developing and changing as he gets older. So really the sort of theme or like running premise behind this book is that small moments in life are sometimes the thing that make the biggest effect. And it's just fascinating for me to think through how true that is, that while not necessarily every single decision we make is like an earth-shattering decision, there are certain things that can literally change the entire course of what is happening to the world. If you're a fan of magical realism and you have not read these books, you really should, because Madeleine L'Engle's writing style is just delightful and everything about it is wonderful. Up next, Wonderstruck by Margaret Feinberg. So this is one of 2 nonfiction books I read this month. I picked this book up a couple of years ago when I was at the Q conference in Los Angeles, and I met Margaret Feinberg, heard her talk, and just loved everything about the person that she was and her story. And one of the things that I'm starting to notice about books like this, which is the like Christian nonfiction life genre, is that if I don't read them at the right time in my life, I don't necessarily connect with them in a certain way. And I think that was the case for this particular book. The subtitle for Wonderstruck is Awaken to the Nearness of God. And in each chapter, Margaret Feinberg goes through and sort of shares a story about something that happened in her life and talks about how this one particular moment, for whatever reason, reminded her of just how present and active God is in our everyday life, even when we're not paying attention. And she goes through and talks about how we can have a much deeper and closer relationship with Him than we probably even realize, because He is genuinely working and moving and doing things in the seemingly mundane parts of our lives. The general thought process reminded me of the book 1000 Gifts by Anne Voskamp, which when I read a couple of years ago, it blew me away. And I don't know if it was the writing style or, like I said, I just didn't read it at the right time, but I enjoyed this book, but I didn't love anything about it necessarily. I wound up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, it was an interesting read, and Margaret Feinberg as a person is a delightful human being, but I just didn't connect with her writing in the way that I expected. And finally, book 13, On Writing by Stephen King. I picked this book up like probably 2 years ago. It's been sitting on my shelf for far longer than it should have, and seeing as November was National Novel Writing Month, On Writing seemed an appropriate book to read. And guys, let me just say, if you are a writer and you have not picked up this book, get on that like pronto. This book is fan-frickin-tastic. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved everything about it. So the book is split up into 3 parts. The first part is like a memoir-ish type section where Stephen King goes through and tells through little vignettes of his life, basically the story of how he became a writer. The second section, which is the shortest section in the book, is called Toolbox, where Stephen King uses the analogy of a toolbox for the tools that a writer needs in order to create good stories. The third and final portion, which is the major bulk of the book, is the On Writing section, and I read that entire section, which is like half of this book, in one day, because it's just, it's incredible. He's very no nonsense in his advice, and he covers everything from like plot and characters to backstory to finding an editor. So I've never actually read a Stephen King novel, but based on the fact that Stephen King has written like 50 books or something, and pretty much all, if not all of them, have been bestsellers, the man knows what he's talking about. Basically, if you are a writer of any kind, or you aspire to be a writer of any kind, get this book pronto and read it, because it's just chock full of no-nonsense, fantastic advice from a guy who really, really knows what he's talking about. So there you have it, friends. That is my November wrap-up. Like I said earlier, if you did NaNoWriMo, I would love to hear how it went for you. And if you have read any of the 13 books that I read this month, please let me know in the comments. I would love to discuss them further with you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye! Friends, my name is Sarah, and it's time for my we just started December. Cress and Winter, oh, I totally have these arranged in the wrong order, dang it. And figure out what his plot is. Oh no. CarrieAnnHayes.com. No. Okay. No.